don't think anything like this has ever been done. Today, I'm excited, delighted, and honored to be speaking with the past presidents of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology. The Society of Vertebrate Paleontology was founded in 1940 with one woman founding member amongst around 20 or so male founders. That woman was Tilly Edinger, the creator of the field of paleoneurology, and she became president of the society 23 years after its initiation. The next woman to become president was Mary Dawson in 1973, 10 years after Tilly Edinger. But in the last 20 years, 8 of our presidents have been women. I am honored to be talking to 7 out of the 8 women presidents of SVP. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with me today. We're going to get started with an easy question. So, what got you into paleontology? And we'll start with Cathy Forster.
Well, funny you should say that. I just pulled this out of my bookcase. This is my childhood dinosaur book, one of many that I had when I was a little kid. So it's falling apart because I looked at it almost every day. I was just always interested in prehistoric life, right? And I was always a collector. I always collected rocks. I collected agates. I collected fossils when I could. I just something that always fascinated me. And I was one of those little kids who was really into dinosaurs who never grew out of it. And I just kept going.
I was also like that.
Yeah.
And here we all are. Catherine, how about you? How did you get into paleontology?
It's slightly different route, I would say. I remember as a girl being able to name, 25 kinds of dinosaurs, very precisely, and had little models and so forth. But then that interest faded, and I was very interested in the natural world in general, and in part, and very concerned about biodiversity loss from a young age. So in college, I took in my first year, I took an introductory geology course and an introductory biology course. And at that time, the intro biology class was focused on physiology and cell biology, very little organismal, and I was very turned off. Whereas the geology class had me outdoors on a field trip within the first 6 weeks. And I thought, this is the way I want to be spending my time. So I decided to major in geology, but I retained my interest in biodiversity, which naturally drew me to paleontology. And then I had a wonderful experience as a graduate student being able to work in the very early stages of a new sort of long-term field project in Pakistan. And that, kept sort of fueling my interest more and more.
Blaire, how about you? How did you get into paleo?
Yeah, when I didn't start at an early age. I mean, I collected rocks at an early age and did things that you might have said, oh, look, but no, I wasn't really thinking about being paleontologist. I love dinosaurs. I always chose, when we play dinosaurs, I always chose to be T-Rex. So I clearly had this carnivore thing going right from the beginning. Yeah, but yeah, but it was when I was in college and I went to Stockton State College where Margaret Lewis is right now. Right, and I was in part of the earliest students there when the college first opened. There were 2 faculty there that were paleontologists, quite remarkably. And one was Roger Wood, who was a vertebrate paleontologist, and the other was Claude Epstein, who was a geologist and more invertebrate paleontologist. And I took classes with them, and I really, really got excited about the classes and the subject matter. And the thing I really liked biology, but I also liked geology, and I even wanted to do astronomy, but I could never fit it in there, all the natural sciences. But the thing that made paleontology appeal to me is that you can do both.
Margaret, I know you have a slightly different sort of path and interest in the paleo world. Do you want to share how you got into paleo?
My dad was kind of a closet geologist, paleontologist, and growing up in Texas, we'd drive out and look at the dinosaur footprints, which were kind of gross because they had lots and lots of poop in them, cattle poop and things like that. and my parents would reward me by taking me to the Houston Museum of Natural Science as a little kid. I would have lived there if I could, but sure, they had a really great dinosaur, and that's what all the other little kids were looking at. I was looking at the saber-toothed cat, which wasn't a cat, but it still had sabers, and I was just fascinated by it. I read a National Geographic where there was a woman working at Pompeii, and she was talking about what she could tell from the bones and how she could tell, like, what did they do for a job, and what all of the sort of things that had happened to women. And I was particularly interested in I became very interested in like bones and how that reflected women's lives. And so I went off to Rice to be kind of an osteoarchaeologist. And while I was there, I tried to pick up geology double major with anthro, but had some really bad interactions with faculty there that I can tell you about. I mean, before I'd even taken a class, like just very sexist kind of stuff from an old guy that was there. I don't even know who he was. So I went more the bio-anthro route. Went off to grad school to study human evolution because I'd gotten more into the paleo part, because it's all the same, whether you're doing it with human bones, whether you're doing it with dinosaur bones, we're looking at what those bones can tell us about the past. And that's when I found carnivores and came back to that initial 5-year-old love of things with big, nasty teeth, and got to, cold called Annalisa one day, super excited about running hyenas.
I remember that.
Yeah. And because we didn't really have email back then. So, and that's, so I work on the evolution of carnivores and how they ate hominids rather than the hominids themselves.
I want to go back to Jessica for a second, because I was going to come back to you right after Catherine about your experience being president during COVID. I know that was a big shift from having not only just like in-person meetings every year to having to move the meeting online, but there's a lot of decision making in the background that has to happen, not only for planning the meeting, but just how to run the society during COVID. And I would love to hear your experience on that.
So there was kind of a double whammy, because COVID started, and I was the vice president at that point, and I think it started in March. And by the beginning of April, I said to Emily and David, Emily was president and David was past president, we're going to have to cancel the meeting. And they didn't believe me. But I was talking to my brother-in-law, who's an epidemiologist. And I was very convinced, based on the numbers, that we were going to that everything was going to be shut down. And subsequently, we eventually made that decision over the summer. But I brought it up as soon as it occurred to me, because I knew but more lead time we had, the better off we'd be. And that was, it was challenging to get everybody to listen to me. But you elect a Jewish mother. Anyway, so there was that. And then we had, as soon as it hit, we almost instantly were hit with the business office collapsing and switching business offices very quickly in Emily's term. And then I took it on. And so one of the challenges for me was negotiating all the planning that had to go on to move the meetings online, having been the only person in recent memory to have hosted an in-person meeting, reconstructing all of the business office knowledge on how to run a meeting. Realistically, like, there's a lot more to meeting planning than just paying for it. And so, like, all of that stuff, that was one of the most challenging parts. And the other most challenging part was that everybody being home and online meant that everybody was hyped up and angry about everything. And I don't think people really realized how much more pressure they were putting on the executive than they normally do, because everything had to happen now. We had to fix racial integration problems. We had to fix sexism problems. We had to fix accessibility problems. Like, everything needed to be fixed instantaneously, or we were horrible people who deserved to be banished. Like, that was the attitude online. And it was very challenging to navigate. And I know both Emily and I really, when it came time to be past president, kind of hid a little bit, because it was so overwhelming to be the president.
It was tough. Watching you struggle through that was so difficult. And we had been ramping up how we do our ethics system, and I think Emily took the first brunt of that, and then you, and then me. And I mean, that's why I asked for a committee, because it's hell. It's hell. And
Yeah, and I mean,
allowing-
I think each of us sort of ramped up, sort of
Yeah.
asking for more help and trying to navigate it. And I think it's calmed down a bit now.
Yeah.
well, and we're
in terms of
divorcing it from the XCOM because it's
Yeah.
just not a good way to have your
Yeah.
ethics
Yeah.
committee,
But it was challenging under, different interpretations of the bylaws and so on, just to
Yeah.
deal with it.
You're also getting, on top of COVID, you're getting this huge social awareness of kind of ethical identities and violations of identities, or we start to get our pronouns and people being upset
Yeah.
when you use the wrong pronoun. And, all of that is suddenly it's being in a new world
right.
socially.
There was all of that. And plus, honestly, and the part that I think really was hardest for Emily and Margaret and me as vice president was hearing the stories of what has been going on.
Mhm.
And there are some of our colleagues who I'm never going to be able to look in the face properly again. It's depressing. And that was really hard. And part of the thing I'm proudest about was that we rewrote the ethics so that we could do something, because our lack of policies on that meant we had very little in our toolbox for dealing with it.
Yeah.
And so that's like the part that I feel most strongly about, that and finally getting double blind review onto JVP, because I feel like those make the most difference for other women and anybody with any kind of minoritized background at all.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's the thing I'm most proud of doing, was going through, and I wrote the step-by-step, how do you actually, how do you submit, because we had a process, but it was crushing everybody, and people didn't know. And also we needed to specify what we could do, because we can't go out and get you fired. We have no control over that. All we can do is prevent you from coming to the meeting, prevent you from publishing, prevent you from being a member, either for a certain amount of time, and making sure that everybody understood what that was, because you're getting it from all sides, what people can do, and people don't have to talk to us. We're not the police, we're not lawyers. So kind of codifying that, and it's been really nice to see, right, the ethics committee now is in the process of reworking that and integrating things with it, but it still stands. So I feel pretty good about having, that's one of my two things that I'm happiest about, that I was able to do, because I think that takes the pressure off. Like, Jess was having to spend a lot of time just explaining what we couldn't do.
I'm still in the, as the vice president, I'm still in the role of being the chair of the ethics committee. I think we're working on deciding now with the executive committee whether that is the best way for the society to deal with ethics issues, because usually if you think about how it works at, an institution of higher learning like a college or university, the deciding body that decides whether there should be sanctions on someone isn't a part of the investigatory committee. And so we're kind of thinking about refining some of those policies and procedures that I think were really established maybe during like Jessica Theodor and Margaret Lewis's presidencies. Those issues were really passion points, I think, for both of them. And they did a lot of work on creating a much more, I don't know, kind of rigid structure for how people can make complaints and how complaints are handled, which I think has been really important for the society as we've had more complaints as time has gone by. So our complaints now are, I would say, usually divided into two big components. There are complaints that are about interpersonal ethics violations, like people maybe harassing other people, things like that sometimes are coming up. And there's also a category that we think of as the specimen ethics issues and how to deal with, for example, publishing or researching commercially collected specimens that aren't held in the public trust. Things like that are coming up. And it is, I think it's probably a little bit more streamlined than it was when Blaire was president, because we do have this like online system where people can make complaints and provide evidence. But personally, as I'm coming into this new role, I'm finding it hard sometimes to figure out when SVP has a job in dealing with a particular kind of ethics complaint. So obviously, if things are happening in our journals or at our meetings, that seems really obvious that, you know, that's a place where SVP has a real responsibility to deal with those kinds of ethics complaints. But there are lots of things that people report to the society that are from social media or from something that happened at their institution. And yes, these people might be members of the society, but you know, there are other channels for those complaints to be worked through. Like they could go through their university or museum, or something might have happened. And sometimes I'm trying to figure out, like, how does SVP's role fit into the other structures that exist for people who have experienced something harmful or, you know, or harassing, for example. And so I think I'm trying to decide or figure out for myself right now. I don't think that our job as the ethics committee is to kind of police vertebrate paleontologists everywhere in the world all the time for ethics violations. But I think some members of the society kind of think that's what we're doing. And so the number of complaints we've had about social media, I've just like gone crazy.
Yeah, very different issues from when I was vice president, early 2000s. And I just remember one particularly challenging situation was a senior paleontologist was actually convicted of removing vertebrate fossils from federal lands. And at that time, the ethics committee was part of the XCOM, and that was the responsibility of the vice president to kind of handle these issues. Well, as it turned out, I had to write a letter to this scientist, you know, essentially removing him from membership. I don't remember if we had a time period on it or what at the time, but what was particularly difficult for me is that I had actually taken vertebrate paleontology from this scientist, as you know, when I was an undergraduate. So it was a really, really challenging, difficult letter to write, but yeah, we worked our way through it. And you know, it was just hearing everybody else talk about the issues that you know were a part of their presidency. This ethics committee has a history that goes way back, and of course you can see through time very different issues confronted the president.
Yeah, and I sort of came along after you did, Annalisa, and I remember we also had a couple of that lingering one that Casey you're talking about lingered in my, you know, my role, but also we had another major issue that had to do with sort of a kind of like plagiarism of student paper. And then inappropriate accreditation. And that turned out, I mean, the thing that I realized is any ethics complaint, whether valid or invalid, takes orders of magnitudes of hours to work out. And no matter, especially if you try to make the process fair, don't assume that the accused is guilty until you've given them a chance to speak. And then there's a huge amount of back and forth. And you know, I'm sure this is still going on. And so, you know, but the fact that societies have to wade into and be very forthright and transparent about ethics violations is the right thing to do. But it's, you know, we are often then put in roles we've never been in before, and then with a huge amount of responsibility.
We're going to shift gears a little bit off the ethics questions and issues and talk about how demographics have changed in the society over the time.
From my point of view, I guess the main thing has just been the increase in the number of women, I think, that are there, and of all ages. But yeah, there really has been quite an increase. And also our positions of leadership. I mean, we have more women presidents now in the last, decade than we've had men presidents. Yeah, so... And I think that's a good thing. Sometimes I think, you know, women get these appointments just because the men are like, I don't want to do that job, you know, let them do it, right? I'm going to do my research and get important, you know, get my nature paper out, let them do the heavy lifting. But no, it's also, even if there is part of that going on, it doesn't matter, because it gives us a chance to have leadership roles and help shape the society and improve the society from our point of view as well. And we make great role models for other young women to say, yeah, I will be accepted into this, or I hope I'll be accepted. It looks like you do get accepted into this society, no matter whether you're female or male.
When I was first coming to the meetings, there were, just a handful of women, maybe 10. And I was actually the first female president after, I think 35 years. The person before me was Mary Dawson. So I don't want to say there were other women that were asked to run for president, and for various reasons, the timing wasn't right for them. So it just happened that the timing was good for me, and I said yes. But still, for there to be a gap of, like 35 years. But I mean, I'm sure if you were to, we would have had an opportunity to talk to Mary Dawson, she would say even fewer, women. She was one of the very first women that was actually giving papers and presentations, and highly regarded by her colleagues and so forth. So I certainly saw a lot of students, but over the years after me, then this little group that I kind of hung out with, I would see the same people: Blaire van Valkenburgh, Cathy Badgley, Christine Janis. The same group of us would always show up and talk about science and paleontology and everything. And then year after year, I kept seeing more and more women are getting interested and involved, and coming to meetings and giving presentations. So it really, really changed. Years. For the
Cathy, how about you?
Yeah, kind of the same thing. There's, when I first started going to SVP meetings when I was in graduate school, there are very few women, but there are also very few people. Right. SVP used to be much, much smaller than it was. The first meeting I went to, I think, was Rapid City. And I don't think there was more than maybe 300 people there, 250, 300. It was a very small meeting. And, very few women. So now I go to SVP and I notice a big shift. First, I noticed that I'm one of the oldest people now, right? I'm like one of the old people. There are so many people in their 20s and 30s now at SVP meetings, way more than I've ever seen before. A lot more women. I think it's at least half or more women of the younger crowd. So demographics are really shifting. A lot more women and just a lot more people into paleontology than there ever have been in the past.
And Margaret?
I know when I started, the first time, so we used to have the first night, the smoker, which was the reception, right? And people would be smoking and having their whiskey. And I remember walking in with a male friend of mine, and all of the guys, because it was very small, like Cathy said, right? All the guys that are there with their whiskeys and their stogies, they all turned to look to see who was coming in the door. And we looked at them and they didn't seem off-putting or anything like that, but we just saw clouds of smoke and guys in suits, and we just went, nope, and slowly and it did, like I said, they didn't seem unwelcome, but it's just like, that didn't do anything for me. I didn't want to drink whiskey or smoke cigars, not to judge people who do, but the rest of that meeting, I mean, I think that's where I finally got to meet Annalisa in person, and Blaire van Valkenburgh, and all the people that were going to help me with my carnivore stuff. So there were women there, but it was definitely kind of a very male dominated thing. I can tell you, in terms of just how numbers changed, Cathy Badgley's push for internationalization, we went from the majority of our membership was North American and primarily US, with the secondary in Canada. But even back then, we still had a lot of Argentinian members. We had people from, right, from the UK, from a couple of other places. But the XCOM came up with all of these strategies, and the membership committee working together, and we're still US, Canada dominated, but it is fundamentally different. And the other shift that we've seen is the shift towards large numbers of undergraduate members. So we installed junior memberships for high school students.
Yeah.
And, we have a couple of those every year at the year, but the undergraduates have gone up, percentage of women has gone up. And of course, how we talk about race and ethnicity changes from country to country. So how can we ask questions that are going to make sense to an international membership is a major question. But and then the same thing as well, like there was a lot of debate over how are we going to, you know, why do we want to know about gender or sexuality or any of these things? And some people are very against, you know, labeling, and others want to know, right? Because it helps to empower us. And so I don't know about you guys, but my sense also is that this is the most trans-friendly society that I belong to. And that was really important to me in my presidency. I have trans family members. I think that everybody has a place at SVP regardless, you know, as long as you follow our ethics policies. And the other thing is I think it's also, you know, become increasingly all LGBTQ friendly. And that has a lot to do with the folks who've put together, right, the LGBTQ mixer and the incredible things that SNPLC is doing with roundtables and reaching people. And I think that, I don't know, I think it's just a really exciting time to be a young person in the society right now. And I hope people are feeling welcome here.
I think the last two questions, and you can choose which one of these two you answer or both, is what do you think the biggest challenge for the future of the society is? And what is your advice for young paleo enthusiasts?
The best thing is to, sort of have a broad natural sciences background as much as you can prior to college and then in college also, because as a paleontologist, we do tend to cross over between different fields, and it'd be helpful to have that background, even if ultimately you become, you know, a systematist and you spend all your time figuring out great phylogenetic characters. You still need to know the biases that go into the record and all those kinds of things. So yeah, a broad science, a natural science background, I guess, is what I've usually told people when students write and say, what classes should I take? And say, take geology, take biology. Yeah. So that's basically what I would say, I think.
Yeah, I
Kristi?
think I would maybe echo what Blaire says. I think it's really important to have that broad background, but also to say that paleontology is such a diverse field of study, and you can drop in so many different ways. Like you can be a paleontologist if you were a chemistry major in college. You can be a paleontologist if you were a physics major in college. You can make paleo art and be an art major in college. You can be just really good at puzzles and be a preparator. You know, there are so many different places where I think different disciplines influence our field. I think I would also say that writing is really important, and writing as much as you can when you're, you know, in high school and in college, and not being afraid of editorial comments. Math is also, you know, really important, and being able to use these programs like R and Python to do things in our field I think it's becoming increasingly important to be adept on those fronts.
Margaret.
So I'm still the past president right now. I think everybody's struggling right now. We're still not truly post-COVID. We are in a worldwide difficult political situation with regards to science and with regards to equality for all. We are in a worldwide economic situation, and people are struggling. And so we have the still redefining what is a society for in these times, right? Where people they may lose the ability to come together physically. What can we be as a society where either because of climate change or money or political turmoil, people may not be able to come together, or fear, right, of going to specific countries? And I will say SVP tries not to go to countries that are unsafe, but I don't know. The whole USA may be like that now.
Cathy.
Yeah, so I think kind of the corollary to that is there are a lot more people in graduate school. There are a lot more people graduating. There's more people interested in VP. And there aren't enough academic jobs. So I think we need to think a little broader about when we train our students. Where else can you go as a paleontologist? I always thought it would be great if I could train a master's or a PhD student in paleo and then have them go and get a degree in public policy and go into public policy and kind of spread the science word, or go into politics, or go into something else. So I think we need to think a little more broadly about what we're doing as we train graduate students.
Yeah, let me follow on with something a little bit different, but that builds on what Cathy just said. I echo and support the problems that Cathy and Margaret have mentioned. But I would like to say that I encourage, what I'd say to a young person, you get an amazing expansive vision of Earth history, life, the fact that life is capable of adapting to incredible challenges and has come up with extraordinary life forms, of which we are one. And it's a field in which you'll never be bored. You will always be able to be a wonderful time traveler, and we can use our insights from the past to help us think about the environmental challenges we face now.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just add, I mean, I agree with what everyone has said so far. And I just said, now more than ever, I think we all realize the importance of communicating not just paleontology, but science to the general public, and looking at, trusting in evidence and fact-based knowledge.
Absolutely.
Seems to be a big challenge, and will be into the future. So anything we can do to help mitigate that challenge is great.
I think for me, I think we've already been working, at least I know I have, with students trying to diversify their career paths. I have students who work in museums. I've had students go into vet school. The thing that I think is really important is framing to them what skills they take from the degree and how important those are, and also advocating for the view that we have of the importance of the historical understanding that we have of the earth and that system in whatever we are looking at. And I do that when I'm teaching students anatomy who are planning to go to vet school and med school, because it's really important that they understand where all these structures come from and why they're stupid. Like, anatomy has so many weird things that are just evolutionary legacies. And if they understand that, they're in, and they've taken in some of what we've talked about, they're in a better position to just interpret what they read in the media, to understand, to go to the papers and read them, right? And to respect the process, that the process involves a lot of failure. Failure is part of it. That's how you learn. And what we see right now is people who want a very certain, very black and white universe fighting against those of us who recognize gray. Mm-hmm. And it's really important in the world we're living in to emphasize the gray.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said.
This has been incredible. Thank you so much, everybody, for taking part in this interview and being a part of the Dr. Neurosaurus channel. It means a lot to me, and I know it's going to be really valuable to the viewers. So thank you all, and this has been amazing.